Alrighty, what are we going to do this week? Well, we're going to start looking at some groundwater stuff. So, obviously, in relation to the surface water and the flooding that we just covered, there is a component of water that actually sinks into the ground and is stored in the subsurface. And so, we're referring to this as groundwater. So, there's some problems, of course, associated with groundwater. Some of it's contamination, because obviously we need that water to drink. Some of it is just supply. Some of it is a little more catastrophic, like potentially some earth fissures or some sinkholes. And so we're going to cover all those things in this module this week. So what I've done in the lecture portion is just like you should be used to. There is a PowerPoint, and then there are a couple of videos that kind of walk through the PowerPoint. This one's broken up into two parts, much like some of the other information, because you need some background. We'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of groundwater, some terminology, how groundwater moves in the subsurface, and things like that. So we want to be able to evaluate, like, how much groundwater do we have? So when we drill into the ground, we know that there's water that will fill our well. It gives us an estimate of how much water there might be there. And water does flow in the subsurface. There's motion, and we can actually contour the top of the groundwater table, much like the contour of the surface of the earth. And so being able to do that with some drill holes in the ground, which tells us elevations, we can compute the kind of direction of flow, and it would be just like it was on the surface. It's going to flow from high elevations to low elevations. And this, of course, is useful when we talk about contamination, because we want to know where the contamination is going, because, of course, it's flowing in the direction that the groundwater is flowing. So that's just one of the issues we'll discuss in the lecture part. So more nuts and bolts, and then talk a little bit about the hazards, like we talked about. There is some structural problems, subsidence. The earth can sink a little, it can crack a little, it can collapse. Those are our sinkholes. We can run into issues with not having enough groundwater. We can run into issues with contamination of groundwater. So that's what we'll talk about in the second part, and then potentially how we can fix some of those issues. So that's the main lecture part. The article here is going to talk a little bit about groundwater depletion. So we're worried about our fresh water supply, and so we get some of that from surface water. We certainly get some of that from the ground. If we use too much, it doesn't get replenished as fast as, let's say, lakes or reservoirs. So potentially we could run out or deplete it to the point that we can't get good fresh water out of the ground. And so that article kind of focuses on that. The video is going to talk about a more kind of bigger disaster, I suppose. And so this one is going to talk about sinkholes. And so sinkholes don't really form so much here in Arizona because of the geology, but typically when there is limestone, which is a sedimentary rock, and is formed in shallow oceans, shallow marine, where there's reefs and lots of calcium carbonate. So we can get layers of limestone, right, bedded, just like sandstones and mudstones. But the limestones will actually dissolve over long periods of time as groundwater moves through them, and they can form cave systems. So we have some of those, right? Carlsbad, things like that. So there are cave systems in places where there's lots of limestone. Some of those cave systems are close to the surface, and they can collapse over time for a variety of reasons. So the video is going to talk a little bit about that. So you can watch that and then take the quiz over that. And then finally, the homework is going to be just a few more questions about groundwater. And also, there is 3 different formats here because I'm asking you to kind of draw some lines on the homework. And I know for some of you, you can't draw with, some of the docs, the Word docs or PDFs. So, of course, you can always print it and draw on it and then take a picture and all that stuff. I threw in the PowerPoint just because you can, if you're in the PowerPoint, come up to your little drawing tool under shapes and you have this little squiggly thing. And you can draw lines on here, right? So you can do whatever, and then you can save it. And so if that works for you and it's easier, great. But it's just another option to help you complete the assignment. So When it's asking you to draw some contour lines, right, we're connecting lines of equal elevation. And then when we're interpreting that, as you go through the information in the module, it'll talk about how we can contour water tables, indicate flow directions, right? And then that can help us understand, where pollution or contamination is coming from. So of course you can draw on here if that's helpful. Like I said, you can do that, save it, and then just turn in the PowerPoint. But just another option. Other than that, you're going to have a lab also, of course, over groundwater information, and there'll be a short video at the beginning of that to help you go through that. As always, if you're struggling with any of the content or you're not sure of what's happening, you're having some issues, please feel free to contact me and I will help you out.